The soft hum of the city lingered outside Samantha Blake's 30th floor penthouse. Sunlight spilled through the sheer curtains, illuminating the sleek modern furniture and walls, adorned with abstract art worth more than most people's annual salaries. Samantha stirred lazily, her manicured hand reaching for her phone. A flood of notifications greeted her. Party invitations, messages from her equally glamorous friends, and reminders for spa appointments. With a sigh, she rolled out of bed and into her sprawling walk-in closet. Rows of pristine designer dresses, handbags, and shoes lined the walls, each item carefully curated to maintain her image as a New York socialite. She selected a silk robe and glanced at her reflection in the mirror, her expression betraying an unusual emptiness. Breakfast awaited her downstairs, a feast of exotic fruits, fresh pastries, and gourmet coffee prepared by the live-in chef. Samantha took her place at the table, but the head chair remained conspicuously empty. Richard Blake, as always, was absent. She toyed with a slice of dragon fruit, her mind wandering to her father, the man whose success had given her this life of luxury, but at the cost of their relationship. The sharp clink of heels signaled the arrival of Sophia, the head housekeeper. "Miss Samantha, Mr. Blake has requested your presence in his office this morning," Sophia announced with her usual polished demeanor. Samantha frowned. "Did he say what it's about?" "No, miss, only that it is urgent." Richard's office was the only space in the penthouse Samantha rarely ventured into. It exuded a stark contrast to the rest of the home, minimalistic and functional, with every item serving a purpose. Her father sat behind a large glass desk, his eyes scanning a tablet before he looked up. "Samantha, sit," he said, his tone curt. She obeyed, crossing her legs and feigning nonchalance. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait until our usual Sunday dinner?" "Oh, wait, you canceled that again." Richard ignored her sarcasm. "We need to talk about your future." "What about it? I'm perfectly fine the way I am." "No, you're not." His piercing gaze silenced her. "I've indulged you for too long, Sam. It's time you learned the value of hard work and responsibility." Her heart sank. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," he said, leaning forward, "you're going to spend the summer at your grandparents' farm in Montana." Samantha stared at him, stunned. "Montana? A farm? Are you joking?" "Not in the slightest," he replied. "You need to get out of this bubble you've created. Understand what it means to live outside your comfort zone. And if I refuse, you'll lose access to your trust fund until you agree." Her jaw dropped. "You can't do that." "I can, and I will." Later that day, Samantha vented to her best friend, Heather, over the phone. "He's sending me to the middle of nowhere. Can you believe that?" Heather chuckled, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Oh, honey, that sounds awful. But look on the bright side. Maybe you'll find some inspiration for a blog or something." "I don't need inspiration. I need to stay here, where I belong." "Well," Heather said, "if he's cutting off the money, you don't have much choice, do you?" The call ended, leaving Samantha more frustrated than before. She paced her room, debating whether to call her father and argue again. But deep down, she knew it was futile. Richard Blake had made up his mind, and when he decided something, there was no changing it. That evening, over a tense dinner, Richard laid out the rules. "You'll leave in 3 days. Molly, the caretaker, will be expecting you. If you don't follow through, your financial privileges will be revoked." Samantha glared at him, her voice quivering with anger. "You can't just uproot my life like this." Richard's expression softened for the briefest moment. "It's not about taking anything away, Sam. It's about giving you a chance to find something real. Real? The word echoed in her mind long after she stormed out of the room. As she packed her bags half-heartedly, Samantha couldn't shake the sinking feeling that her father might be right. Something was missing from her life. But was a farm in Montana really the place to find it? The sharp scent of jet fuel lingered in the air as Samantha Blake stepped onto the tarmac. Her father's private jet gleamed under the morning sun, a reminder of the life she was reluctantly leaving behind. She hesitated at the foot of the stairs, clutching her designer handbag, her face a mix of frustration and resignation. "Miss Blake, we're ready to take off," said Adam, the family's longtime chauffeur turned reluctant travel companion. His tone was polite but firm. Samantha exhaled dramatically and climbed aboard. Inside, the cabin was immaculate, with plush leather seats and a bar stocked with top-shelf liquor. Normally, such luxury would have comforted her, but today, it felt hollow. She slumped into a seat and gazed out the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of irritation and dread. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, as Adam settled into the seat opposite her. "You'll survive, Miss Blake," Adam replied with a faint smirk. "A little dirt never hurt anyone." As the jet ascended, Samantha scrolled aimlessly through her phone, searching for a distraction. Social media was abuzz with pictures of her friends, enjoying rooftop parties and spa weekends, activities she was supposed to be part of. Each image stung like salt on a wound. "You don't seem excited," Adam remarked, breaking the silence. "Excited?" Samantha shot him a glare. "I'm being exiled to a farm. Why would I be excited?" Adam chuckled. "Exiled? That's dramatic, even for you." She crossed her arms, ignoring him. Her thoughts drifted to her father's ultimatum. For as long as she could remember, Richard Blake had been a distant figure, more a CEO than a parent. His sudden determination to teach her a lesson felt like an attack on the life she'd carefully crafted. But deep down, a small voice whispered that maybe he was right. She silenced it with a sigh. The plane touched down on a small rural airstrip surrounded by endless fields. Samantha stepped out, her heels sinking into the gravel. The warm Montana air was thick with the scent of grass and soil, a far cry from the city's perfume of concrete and exhaust. "Your ride's waiting," Adam said, pointing to a dusty pickup truck parked nearby. A woman in her 50s stood beside it, arms crossed, and an amused expression on her face. "Miss Blake?" the woman called, her voice strong and steady. "That's me," Samantha replied, her tone dripping with reluctance. "I'm Molly, the caretaker. Welcome to the Blake family farm." Samantha glanced at the truck, then back at Molly. "You've got to be kidding," Molly smirked. "You'll fit right in." The ride to the farm was bumpy, each jolt rattling Samantha's nerves. She clutched her designer bag as if it were a lifeline. Molly, unfazed, drove in silence until Samantha broke it. "So, what exactly do you do here?" Samantha asked, her tone sharp. "Everything," Molly replied. "Farming's not a 9-to-5 job." The farmhouse came into view, a modest, weathered structure surrounded by fields of crops and grazing animals. A figure stood near the barn, leaning against a pitchfork. As they approached, Samantha could see he was young, mid to late 20s, with sun-kissed skin and a rugged demeanor. "That's Jake," Molly said as she parked. "He helps out around here." Jake straightened as they got out of the truck, his eyes scanning Samantha from head to toe. "You must be the princess." Samantha bristled. "And you must be the help." Jake's smirk widened. "This is going to be fun." Molly led Samantha into the farmhouse, a stark contrast to her New York penthouse. The floors creaked underfoot, and the walls were adorned with old photographs and rustic decorations. The air smelled of wood and fresh bread, but Samantha couldn't appreciate it. "Here's your room," Molly said, opening a door to reveal a small, cozy space with a simple bed and a dresser. "Dinner's at 6. Don't be late." Samantha dropped her bag on the bed and looked around in disbelief. The room was clean but painfully plain, with no trace of luxury. She collapsed onto the mattress, her phone in hand, and texted Heather, "I've arrived in hell. Pray for me." Her message went unanswered. At dinner, Samantha sat stiffly at the table as Molly and Jake discussed farm work. She picked at her food, a hearty stew and fresh bread, while they spoke in terms she didn't understand. "We'll need to fix the north fence tomorrow," Jake said. "Might need an extra set of hands." Molly glanced at Samantha. "She's available." Samantha nearly choked on her water. "Excuse me?" "You're here to learn, aren't you?" Molly said, her tone challenging. Samantha opened her mouth to argue, but stopped when Jake snickered. "Welcome to farm life, princess." The farmhouse was eerily quiet, compared to the constant buzz of New York. As Samantha lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Every creak of the house unsettled her. She thought about her father, her friends, and the life she'd been forced to leave behind. But beneath her frustration was a gnawing curiosity. What did her father hope she'd find here? What was the purpose of this exile? Samantha didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. This was going to be the longest summer of her life. The rooster's crow tore through the morning silence, jolting Samantha awake. Her eyes darted to the alarm clock on the nightstand, 5:51 a.m. Groaning, she pulled the blanket over her head, hoping to block out the noise. But the relentless crowing was soon accompanied by the sound of footsteps stomping down the hallway. "Rise and shine," Molly's voice rang out, far too cheerful for the hour. "The farm doesn't wait for anyone." Samantha groaned again, louder this time. She peeked out from beneath her blanket to see Molly standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "Let's go, princess," Molly said with a smirk. "You've got chickens to feed." Still groggy and clearly out of her element, Samantha stumbled into the barn, her designer sneakers sticking to the dusty floor. Molly handed her a metal bucket filled with feed. "Spread this in the coop," Molly instructed, "and don't let them out." Samantha blinked. "You mean I have to go in there with them?" "They're chickens, not lions," Molly quipped. "You'll survive." With a deep breath, Samantha pushed open the creaky gate and stepped into the coop. Feathers fluttered around her as the chickens clucked loudly, clearly excited for breakfast. Samantha tried to sprinkle the feed evenly, but one particularly aggressive chicken pecked at her shoe, causing her to shriek and fling the bucket into the air. Feed rained down, sending the birds into a frenzy. Molly, watching from outside, burst into laughter. "Well, that's one way to do it," Jake appeared, leaning casually against the barn door. "You're a natural," he teased, earning a glare from Samantha. "Why don't you try it, farm boy?" she snapped, brushing stray feathers from her clothes. Jake grinned. "I already did." At 5 a.m., after cleaning up her chicken coop disaster, Samantha was allowed a short break. Molly offered to take her into town to pick up supplies, a suggestion Samantha reluctantly accepted. The drive to the nearby town was scenic, with rolling hills and golden fields stretching as far as the eye could see. Samantha stared out the window, feeling a mixture of awe and homesickness. The town itself was quaint, with a single main street lined with mom and pop shops. Molly parked outside a general store and motioned for Samantha to follow her inside. Behind the counter stood a man in his early 50s, with kind eyes and a weathered face. "Morning, Molly," he greeted warmly. "And who's this?" "This is Samantha Blake," Molly said. She'll be staying at the farm for the summer. The man extended a hand. Thomas Thompson, I own this place. Nice to meet you, Samantha. Samantha hesitated before shaking his hand. Nice to meet you too. As Molly chatted with Thomas about the supplies they needed, Samantha wandered through the store, stopping at a shelf displaying jars of homemade jam. A young girl, no older than 8, approached her. Hi, the girl said shyly. Are you the lady from the big city? Samantha smiled. I guess I am. I'm Emma, the girl said, her eyes wide with curiosity. Do you have a horse? Samantha laughed softly. No, but I'm learning about them, Emma beamed. Maybe you can come to our ranch someday. We've got 3 horses. I'd like that, Samantha replied, surprised by her own sincerity. Back at the farm, Samantha helped Molly unload the truck, her arms aching from carrying heavy sacks of grain. As they worked, Molly struck up a conversation. You did better today, Molly said, her tone surprisingly encouraging. Better? I nearly got pecked to death, Samantha muttered. Molly chuckled. It takes time to get the hang of it. You'll figure it out. Samantha paused, looking out at the fields. Do you really think I can? Molly leaned against the truck and regarded Samantha thoughtfully. The question is, do you? The words lingered in Samantha's mind long after their conversation ended. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the day's events, the chaos in the chicken coop, Emma's innocent curiosity, Molly's steady confidence. For the first time, she felt a tiny flicker of determination, a desire to prove, if only to herself, that she could adapt. Unable to sleep, Samantha decided to explore the farmhouse. She crept downstairs, careful not to wake Molly, and found herself drawn to a door leading to the attic. The narrow staircase groaned under her weight as she climbed. The attic was dusty and cluttered, filled with old furniture and boxes. Samantha opened one of the boxes and found a collection of photographs and letters. She picked up a picture of a young woman with strikingly familiar features, her mother, Isabel. Among the items was a journal. Samantha opened it, her heart pounding as she read the neat handwriting. The entries spoke of Isabel's dreams, her love for the farm, and her struggles with Richard's ambitions. Tears welled in Samantha's eyes as she pieced together a picture of a woman torn between 2 worlds. She closed the journal, her mind racing with questions. Why had her father kept this part of her mother's life hidden? What else didn't she know? The next morning, Samantha found Jake repairing a fence near the barn. Determined to prove herself, she approached him. Need help? She asked, trying to sound casual. Jake raised an eyebrow. You know how to use a hammer? Not yet, she admitted. But I can learn. He handed her a hammer and a handful of nails. Let's see what you've got. As they worked side by side, Samantha noticed Jake stealing glances at her. Finally, he broke the silence. Why'd you agree to come here? She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. My father thought it would be good for me. And what do you think? Samantha drove a nail into the wood with surprising accuracy. I don't know yet. Jake nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. Fair enough. By the end of the day, Samantha's hands were blistered, her muscles sore, but she felt an unfamiliar sense of accomplishment. Molly praised her for her effort, and even Jake offered a rare nod of approval. As she sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the fields, Samantha allowed herself a small smile. The farm was far from the life she knew, but for the first time, she wondered if it might hold something she needed. The morning sun cast golden rays over the farmhouse, illuminating the dewy grass and the endless fields stretching beyond the horizon. Samantha awoke to the now familiar sound of roosters crowing. Her body sore from the previous day's work, but her mind surprisingly clear. She quickly dressed in the simplest clothes she could find and made her way downstairs, where Molly was preparing breakfast. "Morning," Samantha said, her tone less curt than it had been on her first day. Molly glanced over her shoulder, smiling faintly. "Morning, Princess. Hungry?" Samantha nodded and sat at the table. She had started to appreciate Molly's hearty breakfasts, even if they were a far cry from the gourmet meals she used to enjoy. As she ate, her eyes wandered to the framed photographs on the walls, black and white images of people she didn't recognize, but felt an odd connection to. After breakfast, Molly sent Samantha to the barn to help Jake, but curiosity tugged at her. She had spent the past few nights thinking about the journal she found in the attic. Today, she decided to explore it further. The attic was just as dusty and cluttered as before, but Samantha felt a strange sense of comfort, surrounded by the remnants of another era. She sifted through boxes of old books, clothes, and trinkets until she found the journal again. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, she flipped through the pages, soaking in Isabel's words. One entry stood out. "Richard doesn't understand. The farm isn't just land. It's part of who I am. Leaving it feels like leaving a piece of myself behind. But how do I choose between my heart and my family?" The words hit Samantha like a punch to the gut. She had always thought of her mother as a glamorous socialite, much like herself, but these entries painted a different picture. Isabel had loved the farm deeply, and her struggle to reconcile that love with her life in the city mirrored Samantha's current predicament. As Samantha closed the journal, she noticed a folded letter tucked inside the back cover. It was addressed to Richard, but appeared to have never been sent. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The letter was dated shortly before Isabel's death and began with a tone of desperation. "Richard, I know you're trying to do what's best for our family, but I can't keep pretending this life makes me happy. I miss the simplicity, the authenticity of the farm. I wish you could see that money and success aren't the only measures of a fulfilling life." Samantha's chest tightened as she read. Isabel had wanted to return to the farm, to a life of meaning, but something or someone had kept her from doing so. Folding the letter carefully, Samantha placed it back in the journal and resolved to confront her father when the time came. That evening, Samantha sat on the porch, the journal weighing heavily in her lap. Jake joined her, a glass of iced tea in hand. "You've been quiet today," he said, taking a seat beside her. Samantha hesitated, unsure whether to share what she'd found. Finally, she handed him the journal. "It was my mother's." Jake opened it cautiously, flipping through the pages. His brow furrowed as he read a few lines. "She wrote a lot about this place. She loved it here," Samantha said softly. "More than I ever realized." Jake closed the journal and handed it back to her. "Why'd she leave then?" Samantha shook her head. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think my father had something to do with it." Jake didn't press further, sensing her inner turmoil. "The past has a way of catching up with us," he said. "But maybe it's not too late to figure things out." The next morning, Samantha approached Molly as she worked in the garden. "I need to ask you something," she began. Molly straightened, wiping dirt from her hands. "What's on your mind?" "My mother," Samantha said. "You knew her, didn't you?" Molly's expression softened. "I did. Isabel was special. She had a way of making everyone around her feel important." "Then why did she leave?" Samantha's voice wavered. "Why didn't she stay here if she loved it so much?" Molly sighed, removing her gloves. "That's a complicated question, Sam. Your father had big dreams, and Isabel, she tried to support him. But the farm was always her sanctuary." "Did she ever want to come back?" Samantha asked. Molly hesitated, then nodded. Every day. But life isn't always as simple as we'd like it to be. Samantha's heart ached with the weight of those words. Her mother's love for the farm had been buried beneath years of silence and secrets, and now it was up to her to uncover the truth. As the days passed, Samantha delved deeper into the journal. Each entry painted a vivid picture of Isabel's life on the farm. The joy she found in tending to the garden, the laughter she shared with the workers, and the solace she found in the quiet of the fields. But there were also hints of her struggle to adapt to life in the city, her loneliness, and her longing for something more. Samantha began to see parallels between her mother's journey and her own. She had always thought of herself as different from Isabel, but now she realized how similar they were, both caught between two worlds, searching for meaning. In between her introspection, Samantha found herself growing closer to Molly and Jake. Molly became a source of wisdom, offering advice without judgment. Jake, though rough around the edges, proved to be a steady presence, challenging Samantha in ways that forced her to grow. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence together, Samantha turned to Jake. "Do you think people can really change?" Jake hammered a nail into the wood and shrugged. "Depends on whether they want to." Samantha nodded, pondering his words. She wasn't sure if she wanted to change, but she knew she didn't want to stay the same. As the chapter drew to a close, Samantha received an unexpected call from her father. His voice was calm but distant, a reminder of the barrier that had always existed between them. "I'll be visiting the farm soon," Richard said. "We need to talk." Samantha's stomach churned. She wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. But she knew the confrontation was inevitable. The secrets she had uncovered, the questions she had yet to ask, and the emotions she couldn't ignore, all of it would come to a head when he arrived. The farmhouse was quiet, save for the occasional chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves outside Samantha's window. She sat at her small wooden desk, scrolling through her phone. Despite days of physical labor and emotional revelations, she couldn't resist the urge to reconnect with her old life. Social media was her last tie to the glamorous world she had left behind. Her heart sank as she saw a new post from Heather. It was a selfie, taken at a rooftop party Samantha had been invited to, but was now thousands of miles away from. The caption read, "Living my best life. Miss you, Sam. New York nights." The words felt hollow. Samantha sighed and set her phone down, but a notification caught her eye. An email forwarded from an unknown address. Curious, she opened it and froze. It was a string of messages between Heather and another mutual friend, discussing Samantha's absence. "She's totally gone for the summer," Heather had written. "Can you believe her dad shipped her off to some farm? This is the perfect time to make our move." Samantha's breath hitched. "Our move?" She scrolled further and found another message. "Don't worry. Sam won't even see it coming. She's too busy playing Farmer Barbie." The words on the screen blurred as tears welled in Samantha's eyes. Heather, her so-called best friend, was planning something behind her back, something that involved her absence. Samantha's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. "Hey, you okay?" Jake's voice came from the hallway. Samantha quickly wiped her tears and opened the door a crack. "I'm fine." Jake frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Doesn't look like it. You've been up here for hours." "I just need some space," she said, closing the door before he could press further. She returned to her desk, her hands trembling. The betrayal felt like a punch to the gut. Heather had been one of the few constants in her life, and now even that foundation had crumbled. The next morning, Samantha joined Molly in the kitchen, her face pale, and her usual sharp demeanor muted. Molly noticed immediately. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Molly said, sliding a cup of coffee toward her. "I think I have," Samantha muttered. She hesitated, then added, "What do you do when someone you trust turns out to be fake?" Molly raised an eyebrow. "Depends. How bad are we talking?" "Bad," Samantha said, her voice trembling. "Like plotting against you bad." Molly set down her coffee cup and leaned forward. "First thing you do is figure out what they're after. Second, you decide if they're worth confronting." Samantha nodded slowly. "What if it's someone you thought was your best friend?" Molly's expression softened. "Then, it hurts like hell. But sometimes, losing the wrong people makes room for the right ones." Later that day, Samantha confided in Jake as they worked side by side in the barn. She recounted the messages, her voice breaking with emotion. "I don't get it," she said, throwing a handful of hay into a stall. "What did I ever do to her?" "Probably nothing," Jake said, leaning against his pitchfork. "Some people don't need a reason. Jealousy's enough." "Jealous of what?" Samantha snapped. "I'm stuck here while she's living my life." Jake tilted his head, his gaze steady. "Is that really the life you want back?" Samantha opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. The truth was, she wasn't sure anymore. The days on the farm, though grueling, had given her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. That evening, Samantha called Carlos, her family's lawyer. "I need you to investigate something for me," she said, her voice firm. Discreetly, Carlos listened patiently as she explained the situation. "Send me the emails," he said. "I'll look into it and get back to you." 2 days later, Carlos called with the results. "You were right to be suspicious," he said. "Heather and a few others have been trying to access your accounts. They've been planning this for months, using your absence to cover their tracks." Samantha's stomach churned. "Who else is involved?" Carlos hesitated. "A few people from your social circle. I'll send you the list." When the email arrived, Samantha felt the ground shift beneath her. The names included friends she had known for years, people she had trusted implicitly. Each name was a dagger to her heart. The betrayal forced Samantha to reevaluate everything about her life. She had always surrounded herself with people who praised her lifestyle. But now she saw the cracks in that foundation. The farm, with its simplicity and authenticity, began to feel like a refuge rather than a punishment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samantha found herself sitting on the porch steps with Jake. The weight of her discoveries still lingered, but she felt a strange sense of clarity. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "I thought coming here was the worst thing that could happen to me. But now, I'm not so sure." Jake glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "What changed?" Samantha smiled faintly. "Everything." Though Samantha was beginning to embrace her new reality, the looming visit from her father kept her on edge. She knew she would have to confront him about her mother's journal, the betrayal of her friends, and the decisions that had shaped her life. As she prepared for his arrival, Samantha felt a growing sense of resolve. For the first time, she wasn't running from her problems. She was ready to face them head-on. The morning sunlight streamed through the farmhouse windows, casting warm golden hues over the rustic kitchen. Samantha sat at the table, nursing a cup of coffee, as Molly explained the day's tasks. Today, Samantha was assigned to work in the garden, a task that seemed far less intimidating than the barn or chicken coop. "We're weeding the vegetable garden," Molly said, sliding a pair of gloves across the table. "It's simple, but it takes patience." Samantha picked up the gloves, eyeing them skeptically. "Patience isn't exactly my strong suit," Molly smirked. Guess it's time to work on that. Samantha approached the vegetable garden with caution, taking in the neat rows of tomato plants, carrots, and beans. Molly demonstrated how to identify weeds without damaging the crops, and Samantha listened intently. She knelt in the soil, her designer sneakers swapped for sturdy boots Molly had loaned her, and began pulling weeds. At first, the task felt tedious. The sun beat down on her, and her back ached from bending over. But as the hours passed, Samantha found a rhythm. There was something meditative about the process, about focusing on one plant at a time and clearing the space around it. Molly observed her progress, nodding approvingly. Not bad for a city girl. Samantha straightened, wiping sweat from her brow. I think that's the closest thing to a compliment you've given me. Don't get used to it, Molly teased. For the first time, Samantha felt a flicker of pride in her work. The rows she had cleared looked noticeably better, and Molly's approval, though subtle, felt earned. After finishing in the garden, Samantha wandered to the barn, where Jake was repairing a broken wheelbarrow. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him work. His movements were precise, his focus unwavering. Do you ever take a break? She asked, breaking the silence. Jake glanced up, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Do you? Samantha rolled her eyes, but stepped closer. Need a hand? You offering? Jake asked, raising an eyebrow. Samantha shrugged. Might as well. Jake handed her a wrench and explained how to tighten the bolts on the wheel. Samantha followed his instructions carefully, her movements tentative but deliberate. When she successfully secured the wheel, Jake gave her a rare nod of approval. Not bad, he said. High praise coming from you, Samantha quipped. Jake chuckled. Don't let it go to your head. As they worked side by side, Samantha found herself opening up about her struggles, her friend's betrayal, her strained relationship with her father, and her growing confusion about where she belonged. Jake listened without judgment, offering the occasional piece of advice, but mostly letting her talk. You're tougher than you think, he said when she finished. You just need to believe it. That evening, Samantha joined Jake on the porch. The sky was a canvas of pink and orange, the setting sun casting a warm glow over the fields. They sat in comfortable silence, the day's labor leaving them both pleasantly tired. You've changed since you got here, Jake said, breaking the silence. Samantha raised an eyebrow. That's vague. Good change or bad change? Good, Jake replied, his tone earnest. You're not the same spoiled princess who showed up on day one. Samantha laughed softly. Thanks, I think. Jake's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than usual, and Samantha felt a flutter of nerves she hadn't experienced in years. She quickly looked away, focusing on the horizon. The following morning, Molly assigned Samantha to her toughest task yet, harvesting tomatoes. The field was expansive, and the sun was relentless, but Samantha was determined to prove herself. Armed with a basket, she carefully picked each ripe tomato, mindful not to damage the plants. Midway through, her hands ached, and her shirt clung to her from sweat. She paused to wipe her forehead, glancing at the rows she had completed. It was slow work, but she was making progress. Jake appeared, carrying 2 full baskets. Need a break? I'm fine, Samantha said, though her voice lacked conviction. Jake set his baskets down and handed her a water bottle. Pace yourself. It's not a race. Samantha took a sip, grateful for the reprieve. Do you ever get tired of this? Jake shook his head. It's hard work, sure, but it's honest. At the end of the day, you can see what you've accomplished. Samantha nodded thoughtfully. She was beginning to understand what he meant. By the end of the day, Samantha had filled 3 baskets with tomatoes. Her arms were sore, and her back ached, but she felt an undeniable sense of accomplishment. Molly inspected her work and gave a rare smile. "Good job," Molly said. "Looks like you're getting the hang of it." "Thanks," Samantha replied, her chest swelling with pride. That night, as she sat on the porch with Molly and Jake, Samantha realized she had reached a turning point. The farm, which had once felt like a punishment, was starting to feel like a place of growth and possibility. As the trio chatted, a car pulled up to the farmhouse. Samantha's stomach tightened when she saw Carlos step out, his expression serious. He carried a folder, which he handed to her without a word. "What's this?" Samantha asked, her voice unsteady. "Updates on the situation with Heather," Carlos said. "And some information you might want to see about your father." Samantha's heart raced as she opened the folder. Inside were documents that hinted at financial dealings and family secrets she hadn't known about. Her hands trembled as she skimmed the pages. "What's wrong?" Jake asked, noticing her pale complexion. "I don't know yet," Samantha murmured, "but I'm going to find out." The morning air buzzed with excitement as the small town prepared for its annual fair. Vibrant banners and strings of lights were being strung across the main street, and the aroma of fresh popcorn, fried dough, and roasted corn wafted through the air. Samantha stood on the farmhouse porch, watching Molly load crates of fresh produce into the truck. "You coming?" Molly asked, glancing over her shoulder. Samantha hesitated. She wasn't sure she was ready to face the entire town, especially after days of grappling with the revelations from Carlos' folder. But Jake's voice broke her train of thought. "It's the highlight of the year around here," he said, leaning casually against the barn door. "You might even have fun." With a sigh, Samantha grabbed her jacket and climbed into the truck. "Let's get this over with." The fairground was a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds. Booths lined the streets, selling everything from handmade crafts to jars of local honey. A small stage hosted a folk band, their cheerful music setting the tone for the day. Children ran around with balloons, and couples strolled hand in hand, savoring the simple joys of the event. Molly parked the truck near the produce booth and began unloading crates. Samantha joined her, taking in the scene with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. She wasn't used to this kind of gathering, so different from the high society galas and exclusive events she once frequented. "Why don't you take a look around?" Molly suggested. "I've got this handled." Before Samantha could argue, Jake appeared at her side, holding 2 tickets. "Ever been to a pie-eating contest?" "Do I look like someone who's been to a pie-eating contest?" Samantha shot back. Jake smirked. "Exactly why you need to see it." The contest was chaotic and hilarious. Locals cheered as participants dove face first into blueberry pies, emerging with their faces covered in purple goo. Samantha couldn't help but laugh, the sight breaking through her usual defenses. "You're smiling," Jake teased as they walked away from the contest. "That's progress." "Don't get used to it," Samantha quipped, though her tone was lighter than usual. They wandered through the fair, stopping at a ring toss booth, where Samantha, to her surprise, won a small stuffed bear. She handed it to a little boy nearby, who beamed up at her with gratitude. "Look at you," Jake said, his voice tinged with admiration, "becoming part of the community already." "Don't push it," Samantha replied, though she felt a flicker of pride. At the fair's center, Samantha spotted Emma, the young girl she'd met at the general store, painting a mural on a wooden board. Curious, Samantha approached. "Hi, Miss Samantha," Emma chirped, her hands covered in bright paint. "Do you want to help?" Samantha hesitated, glancing at her freshly manicured nails, but Emma's hopeful expression won her over. Kneeling beside the girl, She dipped her fingers into a pot of blue paint and began adding her own touches to the mural. "Not bad," Emma said approvingly. "Maybe you could be an artist." Samantha smiled. "Maybe." Nearby, Molly observed the scene, a small smile tugging at her lips. "She's coming along," she murmured to herself. As the day wore on, Samantha's anxiety began to creep back. She overheard snippets of conversation from locals, who mentioned her father's impending visit to the farm. Though the words were harmless, they reignited her fears about the confrontation to come. Jake noticed her shift in mood as they walked toward the food stalls. "You okay?" Samantha nodded quickly. "Just tired." "You're a terrible liar," Jake said, his tone gentle. "What's really going on?" Samantha sighed, debating whether to open up. "My father's coming to the farm soon. There's a lot I need to talk to him about." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "You'll figure it out." His quiet confidence bolstered her, even as the knot in her stomach tightened. As the fair transitioned into the evening, the sky filled with fireworks, their colors reflecting off Samantha's eyes. She stood with Jake and Molly, the three of them enjoying the spectacle in companionable silence. "This town's not so bad," Samantha admitted, her voice soft. "Don't let them hear you say that," Molly teased. "They'll never let you leave." Samantha chuckled, though a part of her wondered if Molly was right. The farm and the town were starting to feel like home, in a way she hadn't expected. As they made their way back to the truck, Samantha spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Thomas Thompson, the widowed shopkeeper. He approached with a kind smile. "Miss Samantha," he said, tipping his hat. "You've been making quite the impression around here." "Is that so?" Samantha asked, raising an eyebrow. Thomas nodded. "People notice when someone's willing to roll up their sleeves. Your mother was the same way." The mention of Isabel sent a pang through Samantha's chest. "You knew my mother?" Thomas's smile softened. "Everyone around here did. She had a way of making people feel special." Samantha hesitated, her curiosity outweighing her reservations. "What was she like?" Thomas considered her question. "Kind, stubborn. She had a fire in her, but it was tempered with compassion." "You remind me of her." The words lingered in Samantha's mind as they drove back to the farm. Isabel's legacy was everywhere, in the farm, the town, and now, perhaps, in her. That night, Samantha sat on the porch, staring at the stars. Jake joined her, handing her a cup of tea. "Big day tomorrow," he said. Samantha nodded. "Yeah." "You ready for it?" "No," she admitted. "But I think I need to do this." Jake's gaze was steady. "You'll be fine. Just remember, you're stronger than you think." Samantha smiled faintly, taking comfort in his words. The fair had given her a glimpse of what life could be. A life rooted in community, resilience, and authenticity. But the weight of her father's arrival loomed large, a storm on the horizon that she couldn't avoid. The morning arrived cloaked in a heavy mist, the kind that made the fields appear endless and shrouded the farm in an ethereal calm. Samantha awoke early, her nerves prickling with anticipation. Today was the day her father, Richard Blake, would visit the farm. She had rehearsed the confrontation in her mind countless times, but now that the moment was near, uncertainty clouded her resolve. As she dressed in her most practical outfit, jeans and a simple button-down shirt, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Gone was the meticulously polished socialite who had arrived weeks ago. In her place was someone new, someone she wasn't sure she fully recognized yet. Downstairs, Molly was already bustling about, preparing a breakfast of eggs, toast, and freshly brewed coffee. "Nervous?" she asked without looking up. "Is it that obvious?" Samantha replied, sitting at the table. Molly placed a plate in front of her and sat down across the table. "You'll be fine. Just say what you need to say." Before Samantha could respond, the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached their ears. She froze, her fork suspended midair. Molly gave her a reassuring nod. "Go on. He's your father." Samantha stepped onto the porch, just as a sleek black SUV came to a halt in front of the farmhouse. The vehicle looked out of place against the rustic backdrop of the farm. The driver's door opened, and Richard Blake emerged, his sharp suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to the dirt road beneath him. He paused, scanning the surroundings with a mixture of curiosity and disdain before his gaze landed on Samantha. His expression softened slightly, though his posture remained rigid. "Samantha," he said, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken tension. "Dad," she replied, her tone guarded. They stood in silence for a moment before Molly emerged from the house. "Why don't we take this inside?" she suggested, her no-nonsense demeanor cutting through the awkwardness. In the kitchen, Richard sat at the head of the table, his usual position of authority. Samantha took the seat opposite him, her back straight and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Molly placed a cup of coffee in front of him before retreating to the background, giving them space, but remaining close enough to intervene, if necessary. "I see you've been keeping busy," Richard said, gesturing toward Samantha's work-worn hands. "I've learned a lot," Samantha replied evenly, "including things you never told me." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" Samantha pulled Isabel's journal from her bag and placed it on the table. "Mom's journal. I found it in the attic." For the first time, Richard's composure faltered. His eyes flicked to the journal, then back to Samantha. "You've been reading that?" "She loved this farm," Samantha continued, her voice gaining strength. "She wanted to come back here, but you didn't let her." Richard exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. "It wasn't that simple." "Then explain it to me," Samantha demanded, "because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you prioritized your empire over your family." Richard leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "Your mother and I had different visions for our life together. She loved this place, but I wanted to build something bigger, something lasting. I thought I was doing what was best for all of us." "And how did that work out?" Samantha shot back. "She was miserable, and you lied to me about it for years." "I was trying to protect you," Richard said, his voice rising. "You were a child. You didn't need to know all of that." "I needed the truth," Samantha countered. "And I still do." The room fell into a heavy silence. Molly cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "You two need to work this out. But yelling won't get you anywhere." Richard rubbed his temples, his resolve crumbling. "There's more to this than you know," he admitted. "Your mother, she wasn't just unhappy. She was planning to leave." Samantha's eyes widened. "Leave? Why?" "She wanted a simpler life," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She didn't want you caught in the middle. So she stayed. But it broke her." Samantha felt as though the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Her mother's sacrifice loomed heavy in her mind, and her anger toward her father deepened. "You let her sacrifice everything for you, and you never even told me." "I didn't know how," Richard said. "And by the time I realized my mistakes, it was too late." Jake appeared in the doorway, his presence grounding Samantha as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. He offered a small nod, silently encouraging her to press on. Samantha took a deep breath. "You've spent your whole life controlling everything, Dad. But you can't control me anymore." Richard's gaze softened. "I'm not trying to control you, Samantha. I just want what's best for you." "Then let me decide what that is," she replied. Richard nodded slowly. "You've grown up a lot since you've been here. I can see that now." The conversation shifted, becoming less confrontational and more reflective. Richard shared stories about Isabel that Samantha had never heard before, moments of joy, love, and regret that painted a fuller picture of the woman she had idolized. By the time Richard stood to leave, the tension between them had eased, though the wounds were far from healed. "I'll be back," he said. "There's more we need to discuss." Samantha nodded. "There's more I need to say." As his SUV disappeared down the dirt road, Samantha turned to Jake, who had stayed nearby throughout the confrontation. "That was intense," she said. Jake smirked. "You held your own." That evening, Samantha sat on the porch, the journal in her lap. She thought about her mother's sacrifices, her father's admissions, and the journey she was still on. The confrontation had been painful, but it was a step toward understanding, and perhaps even healing. Jake joined her, his presence as steady as ever. "You did good today," he said. "Thanks," Samantha replied, her voice quiet but resolute. "I think I'm finally starting to figure out who I am." Jake smiled. "Told you, you were tougher than you think." As the stars filled the night sky, Samantha felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she was ready to face it head on. The days following Richard's visit were a whirlwind of emotions for Samantha. The confrontation had opened wounds she didn't even know existed, leaving her raw and vulnerable. Yet, amidst the pain, there was a flicker of hope, a sense that something was beginning to shift, not just within her family, but within herself. Samantha spent the morning wandering the fields, the golden sunlight warming her skin. The journal was tucked under her arm, its weight a constant reminder of the truth she had unearthed. She found herself drawn to a quiet spot, by the stream, where the sound of water rushing over rocks soothed her frayed nerves. Sitting on a smooth boulder, Samantha opened the journal to one of Isabel's entries. "The farm is where I feel most like myself. It's where the noise of the world fades, and I can hear my own thoughts. I wish Richard could see that." Tears welled in Samantha's eyes as she read. For the first time she felt truly connected to her mother, not as a distant memory, but as a woman who had faced struggles similar to her own. Later that day, Samantha found Jake repairing a fence near the barn. She hesitated, unsure if she wanted to share her thoughts, but his steady presence drew her in. "Got room for some company?" she asked. Jake glanced up, his expression softening. "Always." Samantha perched on a nearby log, watching as he worked. "I've been thinking a lot about my mom," she admitted, "and my dad. Everything feels messy." Jake set his tools down and turned to her. "That's family for you." "It's more than that," Samantha said, her voice cracking. "My dad kept so many secrets, and my mom, she gave up everything for us. I feel like I never really knew either of them." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes, knowing the truth doesn't make things easier, but it can help you figure out where you stand." Samantha looked at him, her eyes searching. "Where do you stand, Jake?" "With your family, I mean?" Jake's jaw tightened, a shadow crossing his face. "My parents passed when I was young. It's just me in this place now." "I'm sorry," Samantha said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake shrugged. "It's been a long time. The farm's been my family ever since." His words hung in the air, a reminder of the strength that came from finding purpose and belonging. For the first time, Samantha felt a glimmer of that strength within herself. Back at the farmhouse, Molly was kneading dough for the evening's bread. Samantha joined her in the kitchen, the familiar rhythm of Molly's movements grounding her. "Can I help?" Samantha asked. Molly raised an eyebrow but handed her a ball of dough. "You know what to do?" "Not a clue," Samantha admitted. Molly chuckled. "Press and fold. Like this." As they worked side by side, Samantha found herself owning up. "How do you do it, Molly? Stay so steady through everything?" Molly paused, her hands stilling. "Life doesn't stop throwing curveballs, Sam. You just learn to catch what you can and let the rest go." Samantha frowned. "That sounds impossible." "It's not," Molly said gently. "But it takes time and trust." "Trust in what?" Molly smiled. "Yourself, the people around you, and the idea that things can get better." That evening, Samantha returned to the attic, drawn by an inexplicable urge. She rummaged through the boxes until she found another envelope, yellowed with age, and addressed to her. Her heart raced as she carefully opened it. "My dearest Samantha," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means you've found your way back to the farm. I always hoped you would, even if it took time. This place has a way of showing us who we really are." The letter went on to describe Isabel's love for the farm and her hopes for Samantha to one day find the same sense of belonging. By the time Samantha finished reading, tears streamed down her face. The letter felt like a bridge between past and present, a beacon guiding her toward a future she was beginning to envision. The next day, Samantha ventured into town. She stopped by Thomas Thompson's store, feeling an unspoken need for connection. Thomas greeted her warmly, his kind eyes filled with understanding. "Looking for anything in particular?" he asked. "Just company," Samantha replied. Thomas nodded and poured her a cup of coffee. They sat together at a small table near the window, the sunlight casting a golden glow over the wooden surfaces. "This town has a way of bringing people together," Thomas said. "Your mother knew that. She was always the first to lend a hand, to listen." Samantha smiled faintly. "I want to be like that." "You already are," Thomas said. "You just don't see it yet." As Samantha returned to the farm, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The weight of her family's secrets was still heavy, but she was beginning to see a path forward. She would honor Isabel's legacy, not by clinging to the past, but by building something meaningful in the present. That night, she sat on the porch with Molly and Jake, the three of them sharing stories and laughter under the stars. For the first time in years, Samantha felt truly at home, not just on the farm, but within herself. "Tomorrow's a new day," Molly said, as she stood to go inside. Samantha nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "And I'm ready for it." The sky over the farm darkened ominously, heavy clouds rolling in, as the wind picked up speed. Samantha stood on the porch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she watched the horizon. The once golden fields now appeared gray and foreboding, and the distant rumble of thunder sent a chill down her spine. Molly emerged from the barn, her face lined with concern. "Storm's coming," she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "A bad one." "What should we do?" Samantha asked, her voice tinged with unease. Molly's gaze swept across the farm. "Secure the animals, tie down anything that might blow away, and pray it passes quickly." Jake jogged up from the pasture, his shirt damp with sweat. "I've got the horses in the stable," he reported. "We'll need help with the chickens and the barn doors." Samantha nodded, a newfound resolve in her expression. "Tell me what to do." The air grew thick with humidity as the first drops of rain began to fall. Samantha followed Jake to the chicken coop, where the birds were already restless. Together, they herded them into a secure enclosure, the cacophony of clucking and squawking almost drowned out by the rising wind. "Close that latch," Jake shouted over the noise. Samantha fumbled with the latch, her fingers slipping on the wet metal. "Got it," she called, just as a gust of wind nearly knocked her off balance. They sprinted back toward the barn, where Molly and a few workers were struggling to secure the large wooden doors. The wind howled, and the rain lashed against their faces as they heaved the doors shut and bolted them from the inside. The barn was dimly lit, the air filled with the nervous sounds of the animals. Samantha leaned against a beam, catching her breath as the storm intensified outside. "This isn't over yet," Molly said grimly. "We'll need to keep an eye on the roof. If it starts to go, we'll have to act fast." As the storm raged on, water began to seep through the barn's roof, dripping onto the hay below. Samantha noticed the growing puddles and pointed them out to Jake. "We need to move the hay before it gets soaked," she said. Jake nodded. "Good eye. Let's get to it." They worked quickly, stacking the bales in a dry corner of the barn. The labor was grueling, but Samantha didn't falter. For the first time, she felt like an integral part of the team, her actions driven by a genuine desire to help rather than a need to prove herself. When a particularly strong gust rattled the barn, Molly called everyone together. "Listen up," she said, her voice cutting through the din. "If this wind picks up any more, we might lose part of the roof. Be ready to grab tarps and secure what you can." Samantha's heart raced, but she nodded along with the others. Fear and determination warred within her, but she refused to let the former win. Hours later, the storm reached its peak. The wind roared like a freight train, and the rain fell in sheets. Samantha and Jake stood at the barn's entrance, watching as tree branches bent and snapped under the force of the gale. "This is insane," Samantha muttered, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Welcome to farm life," Jake replied with a wry smile. "It's not all sunny days and sunsets." Despite the chaos, Samantha found herself smiling back. "I'm starting to get that." A loud crack split the air, followed by a crash. One of the smaller storage sheds had collapsed under the weight of the storm. Molly cursed under her breath. "We'll deal with that later," she said. "For now, we focus on keeping this barn standing." As the storm began to wane, the damage became evident. Broken fences, fallen trees, and scattered debris littered the landscape. Samantha stepped outside, her boots sinking into the mud, as she surveyed the aftermath. "We've got our work cut out for us," Jake said, joining her. Samantha nodded. "Where do we start?" "First things first," Molly interjected, walking up beside them. "We check on the animals and make sure everyone's safe." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Samantha helped tend to the frightened animals, patching up minor injuries and ensuring their enclosures were secure. Her hands were blistered, her clothes soaked through, but she didn't stop. By the time they returned to the farmhouse, exhaustion weighed heavily on all of them. Molly set a pot of coffee on the stove, while Jake collapsed into a chair, his head resting in his hands. "You did good out there," he said, glancing at Samantha. "Thanks," she replied, a tired but genuine smile on her face. That night, Samantha sat on the porch, the storm now a distant memory. The air was cool and still, the stars twinkling against a backdrop of endless black. Jake joined her, a mug of coffee in hand. "You handled yourself well today," he said, breaking the silence. "I had no choice," Samantha replied. "It's not like I could just sit back and watch." Jake chuckled. "You'd be surprised how many people would." Samantha's gaze drifted toward the fields, her mind replaying the day's events. "I think I'm starting to understand why people stay here. It's hard, but it's real." Jake nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's the thing about this life. It shows you what you're made of. Samantha looked at him, her voice soft but firm. I think I'm starting to like who I'm becoming. The next morning, Samantha awoke to the sound of hammering. Stepping outside, she found Molly and Jake already at work, repairing the damaged shed. Samantha grabbed a tool belt and joined them, her movements confident and purposeful. As they worked, Samantha noticed a stack of letters on the kitchen table, one addressed to her from Richard. Her heart sank as she imagined what it might contain. She tucked it into her pocket, deciding to read it later. For now, there was work to be done, and Samantha was determined to face each new challenge with the same resilience that had carried her through the storm. The morning sun broke through the remnants of the storm clouds, casting a golden glow over the battered farm. The air smelled fresh, cleansed by the downpour, but the landscape bore the scars of the storm. Fallen branches, collapsed fences, and a shed reduced to rubble. Samantha stood on the porch, sipping her coffee and surveying the damage. The letter from Richard sat unopened on the kitchen table, a silent reminder of the unresolved tensions that lingered between them. For now, she pushed it to the back of her mind. There was too much work to do. The day began early, with everyone pitching in to repair the farm. Molly directed the efforts with her usual efficiency, delegating tasks and keeping morale high. Jake tackled the larger structural repairs, while Samantha worked alongside the farmhands to clear debris and rebuild the fences. I never thought I'd be doing this, Samantha said, driving a nail into a wooden post. Funny how life works, Jake replied, handing her another nail. Think you'll stick around? Samantha paused, considering his question. I'm not sure, but I know I'm not the same person who arrived here. That's for sure, Jake said with a grin. You've come a long way, city girl. By mid-afternoon, the sound of tires crunching on gravel signaled Richard's return. Samantha wiped her hands on her jeans, her heart pounding, as she watched his SUV approach. When he stepped out, he looked less polished than usual, his tie loosened and his face lined with fatigue. Hey, Dad, Samantha said cautiously. Richard nodded, his gaze sweeping over the farm. Looks like the storm hit hard. We're managing, Samantha replied, her tone cool but not unkind. Richard gestured toward the barn. Mind if we talk? Inside the barn, the scent of hay and freshly cut wood filled the air. Richard leaned against a stall, his usually commanding presence softened. I owe you an apology, he began, his voice heavy with emotion. For everything. For hiding the truth about your mother. For pushing you so hard, for not listening. Samantha crossed her arms, her expression guarded. Why now? Richard sighed. Because I've been watching you. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. And I see now that I've been wrong about a lot of things. His admission caught Samantha off guard. For so long, she had seen her father as immovable, a force of nature that could neither bend nor break. But here he was, raw and vulnerable. I'm still angry, Samantha said, her voice trembling. But I don't want to stay angry forever. Richard nodded. I don't, either. Later, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Samantha and Richard worked side by side to repair the barn roof. The task was grueling, but it felt strangely cathartic. They didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. At one point, Richard glanced at Samantha, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Your mother would be proud of you. Samantha's throat tightened. I hope so. That evening, after a hearty dinner prepared by Molly, Samantha wandered to the edge of the fields. The sky was painted with hues of pink and orange, and the air was cool and crisp. Jake was there, leaning against the fence, his silhouette outlined by the fading light. "Thought you'd call it a night," he said as she approached. "I couldn't sleep," Samantha replied. "Too much on my mind." They stood in silence for a while, the weight of the day slowly lifting. Finally, Jake turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You've changed, Sam. In a good way." "Thanks," she said softly. "I think I have too." Jake hesitated, then added, "You've got this fire in you. It's inspiring." Samantha felt her cheeks flush. "You're not so bad yourself, Jake." He chuckled, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them under the vast expanse of the sky. As Samantha made her way back to the house, she spotted the unopened letter from Richard on the kitchen table. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the edges of the envelope. Inside, the words were simple but heartfelt. "Samantha, I'm proud of you. I hope we can start over. Love." Dad tears pricked her eyes as she folded the letter and placed it in her pocket. The road to healing would be long, but for the first time, she believed it was possible. The farm basked in the golden light of a new morning, the air buzzing with quiet energy. Samantha sat on the porch, sipping her coffee and looking out at the rolling fields. She felt different, lighter somehow. The days spent working through the storm's aftermath and her heartfelt conversation with her father had shifted something deep within her. Today, an idea had taken root, one that she couldn't ignore. By mid-morning, Samantha had gathered Molly, Jake, and Richard in the dining room. The old wooden table, usually laden with farm-to-table meals, now held her laptop, a notebook, and several rough sketches. Nervously, she cleared her throat. "I have an idea," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The past few weeks have shown me something I never thought I'd see. A bridge between two worlds, the city and this farm. I think we can do something meaningful with that." Molly raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Samantha gestured to the papers on the table. "What if we created a foundation? Something that connects people from different backgrounds. City kids who've never seen a farm. Rural communities that could use more resources. We could teach skills, share experiences, and build understanding." Jake leaned forward, his interest piqued. "You're talking about an exchange program?" "Exactly," Samantha said, her confidence growing. "We could host workshops here, bring people together, and even support local businesses. It wouldn't just be about education. It would be about building connections." Richard, who had been listening intently, finally spoke. "It's ambitious," he said, his tone contemplative. "But it's also a way to leave a legacy that's about more than just money." Samantha blinked, caught off guard by his approval. "You'd support this?" Richard nodded. "If this is what you're passionate about, I'll back it. We can use some of the family's resources to get it started." Molly folded her arms, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Looks like you've got everyone on board." Samantha grinned. "I guess I do." The rest of the day was a whirlwind of planning. Samantha and Richard pored over budgets and potential partnerships while Molly and Jake brainstormed practical ways to integrate the foundation's activities into the farm's daily operations. Ideas flowed freely, and the room buzzed with a shared sense of purpose. "I can reach out to some of my contacts in the city," Richard offered. "Corporate sponsorships, media coverage, it could give us a strong start." "And I know a few local farmers who'd be interested," Molly added. "We can start small and grow from there." Jake tapped the table thoughtfully. "We'll need to set up infrastructure, housing for visitors, classrooms, maybe even a community garden." Samantha scribbled notes furiously, her mind racing with possibilities. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly aligned with her family. their goals intertwined in a way she had never imagined. Over the next few days, the farm buzzed with activity as they laid the groundwork for the foundation. Samantha reached out to friends in New York who worked in philanthropy, carefully navigating the delicate waters of re-entering her old social circle. To her surprise, many were intrigued by her idea, offering resources and connections. One evening, Samantha found herself back in the attic, rummaging through Isabel's belongings for inspiration. She discovered a small notebook filled with sketches and ideas for the farm, projects Isabel had dreamed of but never realized. She was ahead of her time, Samantha murmured, running her fingers over the faded pages. Jake appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "What did you find?" "More proof that my mom was incredible," Samantha said, with a soft smile, "and that this foundation is exactly what she would have wanted." Jake stepped closer, his gaze warm. "Then, let's make it happen." As plans solidified, Samantha began to feel a deeper connection to the farm and its community. She spent afternoons working alongside Jake and the farmhands, evenings strategizing with Molly and Richard, and nights sketching out her vision for the foundation. One evening, Samantha joined the workers around a bonfire, their laughter and camaraderie filling the cool night air. Jake handed her a marshmallow-topped stick, his grin infectious. "Don't burn it," he teased. Samantha rolled her eyes but smiled. "I'm a quick learner." The warmth of the fire and the easy banter reminded her of how far she had come. The farm was no longer a punishment or a challenge. It was home. The cityscape of New York stretched out before Samantha as she sat in the back of a taxi, watching the familiar skyline come into view. It had been months since she'd left, and everything felt both strangely familiar and utterly foreign. The bustling streets, the towering buildings, and the ever-present noise seemed overwhelming after the quiet simplicity of the farm. Her return wasn't for pleasure. It was a calculated step in finalizing the launch of the foundation. As the taxi pulled up to her old penthouse building, Samantha hesitated before stepping out. This place, once a symbol of her privilege and status, now felt like a relic of a life she no longer recognized. The penthouse was just as she had left it, pristine, cold, and devoid of life. Samantha wandered through the rooms, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The closet, once overflowing with designer clothes, seemed excessive now. She ran her fingers over the sequined gowns and tailored suits, wondering how she had ever found comfort in such extravagance. The silence was broken by a knock at the door. Heather, her former best friend, stood there. Her perfectly curated outfit and air of confidence a stark contrast to Samantha's simplicity. "Samantha!" Heather exclaimed, pulling her into an embrace. "You've been impossible to reach. What have you been doing out there in the middle of nowhere?" "Building something real," Samantha replied, her tone measured. Heather's laughter faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Well, whatever it is, you're back now. Let's celebrate." Later that evening, Samantha attended a cocktail party hosted by one of her father's business associates. It was a strategic move, an opportunity to secure support for the foundation. The room was filled with New York's elite, their polished smiles and shallow conversations, a sharp reminder of the world she had left behind. As Samantha navigated the crowd, she overheard snippets of conversation. Some admired her new project, while others dismissed it as a phase. Heather, holding court near the bar, cast a smug glance in Samantha's direction. "You've changed, Sam," Heather said when Samantha approached. "But don't let it go to your head. These people won't take you seriously unless you play the game." Samantha met her gaze steadily. "I'm not here to play games, Heather. I'm here to make a difference." Heather smirked. Good luck with that. The following morning, Samantha met with a group of philanthropists, presenting her vision for the foundation. She spoke with passion and conviction, weaving in stories from her time on the farm and the people she had come to know. What we're building isn't just a charity, Samantha explained. It's a movement, a way to connect people who might never cross paths otherwise. The room fell silent as her words sank in. One by one, the attendees began to ask thoughtful questions, their initial skepticism giving way to genuine interest. By the end of the meeting, several had pledged their support, promising both financial backing and resources. Samantha left the conference room with a renewed sense of purpose, her doubts fading in the face of progress. That evening, Samantha returned to the penthouse and began packing her belongings. She chose only the essentials, clothes, a few personal items, and the journal she had found on the farm. The rest, she decided, would be donated or sold, the proceeds going to the foundation. As she packed, her father called. "How's it going?" Richard asked. "Better than I expected," Samantha replied. "We've got some great backers, and the launch is on track." "I'm proud of you, Samantha," Richard said. "Your mother would be too." The mention of Isabel brought a lump to her throat. "Thanks, Dad." Before leaving New York, Samantha visited one final place, the rooftop garden her mother had loved. It was overgrown now, the plants untended in her absence. She spent hours trimming the bushes and planting new flowers, a quiet tribute to Isabel's memory. As the sun set over the city, Samantha sat on a bench, her hands dirty but her heart full. She whispered a silent promise to her mother, to carry forward the values she had rediscovered and to honor her legacy with every step she took. When Samantha arrived back at the farm, she was greeted by Molly, Jake, and a small group of workers preparing for the foundation's launch event. The sight of the bustling activity filled her with a sense of belonging she had never felt in the city. Jake approached, his smile warm and genuine. "How'd it go?" "It went well," Samantha said. "Better than I expected." "Welcome home," he said, his voice soft but filled with meaning. Samantha smiled, the weight of her journey lifting. "It's good to be back." The morning sun rose over the farm, casting a golden hue on the freshly tilled fields and neatly arranged tents that had been set up for the foundation's launch event. The scent of wildflowers mingled with the aroma of freshly baked bread as the farm buzzed with activity. Samantha stood at the edge of the field, watching workers and volunteers scurry about, putting the final touches on what she hoped would be a day to remember. For Samantha, this wasn't just an event. It was the culmination of months of hard work, self-discovery, and reconciliation. The farm, once a symbol of punishment and isolation, now stood as a beacon of hope and renewal. Molly approached, clipboard in hand, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. "Tents are up, food's ready, and the first guests are starting to arrive," she reported. "You ready for this?" Samantha took a deep breath, nodding. "Ready as I'll ever be." Jake appeared moments later, carrying a stack of chairs. His casual demeanor and ever-present grin helped steady her nerves. "Looks like the whole town showed up," he said, motioning toward the growing crowd of locals and visitors from the city. "Let's just hope they're here for the right reasons," Samantha replied. "They will be," Jake said firmly. "You've put your heart into this." By mid-morning, the farm was alive with activity. Families strolled through the fields, children played in the designated activity zones, and city dwellers marveled at the farm's rustic charm. Samantha moved through the crowd, greeting guests and answering questions about the foundation. Richard arrived with a group of business associates, their tailored suits standing out among the casual attire of the locals. He approached Samantha with a proud smile. It's quite the turnout, he said. Let's hope it stays that way, Samantha replied. There's still a lot to prove. You've already proven more than enough, Richard said, his tone uncharacteristically warm. As the clock struck noon, the crowd gathered near a stage set up in front of the barn. Samantha took the microphone, her heart pounding as she faced the audience. Thank you all for being here today, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. This farm has been many things to me. A punishment, a challenge, and now, a home. But more than anything, it's a place where I've found purpose and connection. She gestured toward a small garden near the stage, its vibrant flowers a stark contrast to the surrounding greenery. This garden is dedicated to my mother, Isabel Blake, who dreamed of a world where people could come together to share and grow. Samantha's voice wavered as she continued. Her vision lives on in this foundation, which aims to bridge the gap between communities and create opportunities for learning, collaboration, and growth. The audience erupted into applause as Samantha stepped back, her chest swelling with emotion. Molly, Jake, and Richard joined her on stage, their presence a silent testament to the journey they had all taken together. The rest of the day unfolded seamlessly. Guests participated in workshops on sustainable farming, sampled locally sourced foods, and engaged in spirited conversations about the Foundation's mission. Samantha floated between groups, her confidence growing with each interaction. At one point, she found herself in a lively discussion with a group of city executives and local farmers. Despite their differences, the conversation flowed easily, united by a shared vision for the future. Jake joined her as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the fields. You've done it, he said, his voice filled with pride. We've done it, Samantha corrected. I couldn't have gotten here without you. As the evening wore on and the guests began to depart, Samantha found a quiet moment to herself. She wandered to the edge of the field, the distant sound of laughter and music fading into the background. The garden dedicated to Isabel stood before her, its flowers swaying gently in the breeze. You'd love this, Mom, she whispered, her fingers brushing against a blooming rose. Thank you for showing me the way. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her reverie. She turned to find Richard standing there, his expression unreadable. You've made her proud, he said quietly. Samantha nodded, tears pricking her eyes. I hope so. Back at the barn, the remaining guests gathered for a final toast. Samantha stood between Molly and Jake, with Richard by her side. Glasses were raised, and voices rang out in celebration. To Isabel, Samantha said, her voice steady, and to the future. The toast was met with cheers, the barn filled with a sense of unity and hope. As the festivities wound down and the guests began to leave, Samantha felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The foundation was more than just an idea. It was a reality, one that promised to bring lasting change. As the farm settled into quiet once more, Samantha sat on the porch with Jake, their hands brushing as they shared a moment of contentment. What's next? Jake asked, his voice soft. More work, Samantha replied with a smile. This is just the beginning. Jake chuckled. Sounds like you're in it for the long haul. I am, Samantha said firmly. For the farm, for the foundation, and for all of us. The stars above twinkled like promises, and Samantha knew that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges. But she also knew she was ready for them, armed with the lessons she had learned and the connections she had built. The Blake Family Foundation officially began its operations with a simple yet profound goal: to connect urban and rural communities in a way that fostered mutual understanding and growth. The farm, now bustling with new energy and purpose, became the heart of this endeavor. Samantha, alongside her family and newfound allies, poured herself into making the vision a reality. The first group of participants arrived at the farm early one crisp morning. A mix of city teenagers and rural community members, they stepped off the buses with expressions ranging from excitement to skepticism. Samantha stood by the barn, clipboard in hand, her heart racing. "Welcome to the Blake Family Foundation Farm Program," she began, her voice carrying over the murmurs. "Over the next 2 weeks, we'll be learning from each other, working together, and hopefully leaving with a new perspective." Jake leaned against a nearby post, watching her with a faint smile. "She's got this," he muttered to Molly, who nodded in agreement. The group was divided into teams, each responsible for different tasks: planting, harvesting, and caring for the animals. At first, the city teens struggled, their manicured hands unused to dirt and calluses. But as the days went on, laughter began to replace complaints, and camaraderie blossomed. One evening, Samantha organized a storytelling session around the fire pit. Participants took turns sharing their experiences, from bustling city streets to quiet rural mornings. "I didn't think I'd ever touch a chicken, let alone feed one," a city teen named Kayla admitted, earning laughter from the group. "But now I kind of get it. This place feels real." A local farmer, Mr. Jenkins, nodded thoughtfully. "And I didn't think I'd ever have a conversation with a kid who lives in a skyscraper. But here we are." Samantha watched from the sidelines, her chest swelling with pride. This was exactly what she had hoped for: a genuine exchange of ideas and stories. Not everything went smoothly. Midway through the program, a heated argument broke out between two participants over their vastly different lifestyles. The tension was palpable as others looked on, unsure how to intervene. Samantha stepped in, her voice calm but firm. "This is what we're here for," she said. "To understand each other, even when it's uncomfortable. Let's talk this out." The group gathered in a circle, airing grievances and finding common ground. By the end of the session, the atmosphere had shifted, the divide bridged by mutual respect. "That was impressive," Jake said later, as they walked back to the house. "You handled it like a pro." Samantha shrugged, her cheeks flushing. "I just said what felt right." As the foundation gained traction, Samantha began to think bigger. She reached out to her contacts in New York, securing partnerships with schools and businesses interested in supporting the program. Richard used his influence to bring in corporate sponsors, while Molly and Jake worked tirelessly to accommodate the growing number of visitors. One afternoon, Samantha sat with Jake under the shade of an old oak tree, going over plans for a new greenhouse. "This could double our capacity," she said, pointing to the sketches. Jake nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You know, you're turning this place into something incredible." "It's not just me," Samantha replied. "It's all of us." He smiled, a quiet moment passing between them. "Still, you should be proud." That evening, after the day's work was done, Samantha found herself sitting on the porch with Jake, the night sky blanketing the farm in stars. The conversation flowed easily, their shared laughter mingling with the sound of crickets. "You've changed, you know," Jake said suddenly, his tone serious. "Not just in how you act, but in how you see the world." Samantha looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. "And you've been a big part of that." Jake leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm glad." The moment hung in the air, charged with unspoken emotion. When their lips finally met, it felt like the culmination of everything they had shared: the arguments, the laughter, and the quiet moments of understanding. By the end of the program, The transformation in the participants was undeniable. The city teens left with a newfound appreciation for rural life, while the local farmers spoke of the fresh perspectives they had gained. Kayla, the city teen who had initially balked at farm work, hugged Samantha tightly before boarding the bus. "Thank you," she said. "This has been life-changing." Samantha watched the buses pull away, a deep sense of fulfillment washing over her. The Foundation's first program was a resounding success, and it was only the beginning. As the farm returned to its usual rhythm, Samantha sat with her family around the dining table, discussing next steps. Molly suggested expanding the orchard, while Richard brought up potential international collaborations. Jake, ever practical, reminded them to pace themselves. "We've come a long way, but there's still a lot to do." Samantha smiled, her gaze sweeping over the people who had become her greatest support system. "We'll get there," she said confidently, "one step at a time." That night, as Samantha stood on the porch, looking out at the fields illuminated by moonlight, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. The Foundation was thriving, her relationships were stronger than ever, and the farm felt like home, in every sense of the word. Yet she knew there were still challenges ahead: expansion, balancing resources, and ensuring the Foundation's long-term impact. But for the first time, she felt ready to face them, buoyed by the lessons she had learned and the people she had grown to love. As the stars twinkled above, Samantha whispered a silent promise to herself and to her mother. "This is just the beginning." The morning sunlight spilled across the fields, bathing the farm in a warm golden glow. The air was alive with the sounds of birds chirping, distant laughter from the workers, and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Samantha stood on the porch, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, and let the moment wash over her. This was home now, a place that had transformed her life in ways she never could have imagined. The Blake Family Foundation was thriving, and the farm had become a symbol of unity and growth. Samantha had received dozens of letters from participants in the Foundation's first program, each one expressing gratitude and sharing stories of personal transformation. The feedback reaffirmed her belief that this was just the start of something much larger. Richard joined her on the porch, a rare smile softening his features. "You've built something incredible here, Sam." "We've built it," she corrected, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I couldn't have done it without all of you." Richard nodded, his eyes misting slightly. "Your mother would be proud." Samantha felt a lump in her throat at his words, but managed to smile. "I hope so." That afternoon, the farm hosted a celebration to mark the Foundation's milestones. Guests from the local community and the city mingled, sharing stories and enjoying the fruits of their labor, literally. The tables were laden with fresh produce from the farm, homemade pies, and jars of honey that had quickly become one of the Foundation's signature products. Molly stood at the center of the activity, coordinating everything with her characteristic efficiency. Jake worked alongside the other farmhands, ensuring every guest felt welcome. Samantha couldn't help but smile as she watched them, grateful for the friendships and bonds that had formed over the past months. As the sun began to set, the crowd gathered around a makeshift stage near the barn. Samantha took the microphone, her heart racing, but her resolve steady. She looked out at the sea of faces, family, friends, and strangers who had become part of her journey. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice clear and strong. "This farm has always been more than just land. It's a place where people come together, where ideas grow alongside crops, and where we find connections that transcend our differences." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This foundation is just the beginning. It's a way to honor my mother's vision and to create a legacy that's about more than wealth or status. It's about people, about all of us. The applause was deafening, and Samantha felt tears prick her eyes. As she stepped back, Jake was there to meet her, his smile warm and steady. "You did good," he said simply. That evening, Samantha, Richard, Molly, and Jake sat on the porch, watching as the stars began to dot the night sky. The celebration had ended, but the warmth of the day lingered. "We've come a long way," Richard said, his voice tinged with wonder. "And we've got a long way to go," Samantha added. "But for the first time, I'm excited about what's ahead." Molly raised her glass of lemonade. "To Isabel," she said, her voice soft but strong. "And to the future." The others joined in, their glasses clinking softly in the quiet night. Samantha felt a deep sense of peace as she looked around at the people who had become her family in every sense of the word. In the days that followed, Samantha immersed herself in planning the foundation's next steps. With Jake's practical insights, Molly's organizational skills, and Richard's connections, the possibilities seemed endless. They talked about expanding the farm's reach, creating scholarships for rural students, and even partnering with international organizations. But amidst the planning, Samantha made time to savor the simple joys of farm life. She loved the feel of soil between her fingers, the sound of the wind in the trees, and the sight of Jake's easy smile as they worked side by side. One evening, Samantha walked to the garden dedicated to her mother. The flowers were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a testament to the care they had received. She knelt by the small plaque, bearing Isabel's name, and ran her fingers over the engraved letters. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As she stood, Jake appeared at her side. He didn't say anything, but his presence was comforting. Together they stood in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. On the farm's final morning of the season, Samantha woke early, the soft light of dawn streaming through her window. She stepped outside, breathing in the crisp air and feeling a profound sense of gratitude. The farm was quiet, the fields bathed in a golden glow. Samantha walked to the edge of the property, where the view stretched for miles. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, the struggles, the growth, and the connections that had reshaped her life. This wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. There were still challenges to face and dreams to pursue. But Samantha knew she was ready for whatever lay ahead. As the first rays of sunlight kissed the land, Samantha whispered a silent vow to honor her mother's legacy, to cherish the family she had rebuilt, and to keep growing, just like the farm itself. The Blake family walked together through the fields, their steps unhurried and their hearts full. The farm stretched out before them, a symbol of everything they had achieved and everything they hoped to build. Samantha glanced at Jake, then at Richard and Molly. She smiled, her spirit light and her purpose clear. This was her life now, authentic, meaningful, and full of love. And as the sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Samantha knew one thing for certain. She had found her true home. As the screen fades to a tranquil view of the farm at sunrise, Samantha's voice comes through, calm yet full of emotion. Sometimes life surprises us. It takes us on a journey we never expected, to places we didn't know we needed. For me, this farm wasn't just a destination. It was a transformation, a reminder of what truly matters: love, connection, and the courage to grow. The scene shifts to a montage of heartfelt moments, Samantha laughing with Jake, Richard working alongside the farmhands, and the vibrant community they've built. Her voice carries on. This story is more than mine. It's about the power of people coming together, about finding hope and purpose, even in the most unexpected places. But the journey doesn't end here. There's always more to discover, more to build, and more stories to share. As the music swells gently, the camera focuses on Samantha, standing in the garden dedicated to her mother, looking directly at the viewer. If this story moved you, inspired you, or even just made you think, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you connected with most. And if you're as excited as I am to see where the next chapter leads, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Together, we'll continue to explore stories that remind us of the beauty in growth and the strength in connection. The screen transitions to a serene shot of the farm at twilight, with the words, "Thank you for watching. See you in the next story."